I never thought it would come to this. I never imagined I would be sitting here, staring at my phone, my hands shaking, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and disbelief. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I was supposed to be standing at the altar, dressed in white, exchanging vows with a man who adored me. Instead, I was watching everything crumble before my eyes because of him. Because Ethan walked away. Because he left me standing there like a fool in front of everyone. Because he refused to accept what was happening, refused to play along, refused to be the weak, spineless man I always thought he was. And now everything was ruined. It wasn't supposed to go this way. My mother had told me it would be fine, that Ethan would understand, that he would step aside gracefully. He's always been the soft one, she assured me. He loves you too much to make a scene. And I believed her. I counted on it. So when she stood up in the middle of the ceremony, when she took my hand in hers and told Ethan, right there in front of everyone, that he had two choices, leave quietly or sit in the audience while my real husband took his place, I thought he would just accept it. I thought he would lower his head in defeat, maybe fight back tears, and then quietly excuse himself, disappearing into the background like he always did. But he didn't. He stood there, frozen, his face drained of all color, his eyes wide with a pain so raw that, for a fleeting second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I glanced at Ryan, tall, confident, everything a man should be. And I remembered why I had to do this. Ethan wasn't strong enough. He wasn't man enough. He was good at playing the part, sure. He took care of the bills, he made sure the wedding was perfect, he bent over backward to make me happy, but when it came down to it, he wasn't the kind of man I needed. Ryan was. And that's why when Ryan came back into my life, when he reminded me of everything I had been missing, everything I truly deserved, I knew I had to make a choice. I had hoped Ethan would just go. That he would understand his place. That he would see that Ryan was better for me, that I was better off with a man who could take charge, who could protect and provide, who could stand next to me and not look like a pathetic afterthought. But Ethan, for the first time in his life, did something I didn't expect. He left. And not just left, he walked out in a way that made it clear he wasn't coming back. There was no scene, no begging, no humiliation, no tears. He just walked away. And when the doors closed behind him, a horrible realization hit me. Everything was in his name. The venue, the catering, the flowers, the music, the honeymoon. Ethan had paid for it all. Ethan had signed every contract. Ethan had full control over everything. I felt the blood drain from my face as I turned to my mother, panic rising in my chest. "Mom," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "What if he?" My phone rang. I scrambled to grab it, my fingers shaking as I saw the notification. The venue. I pressed accept. "Hi, this is Michelle from Rosewood Estate." The voice on the other end said, polite but firm. "I'm calling to confirm the cancellation of tonight's event. Mr. Carter called us an hour ago and informed us that he would no longer be moving forward with the reception. As the contract holder, his request has been processed and..." The words blurred together. My mouth went dry. I barely heard what she said next. Something about deposits, about non-refundable fees, about how the vendors had been alerted and would not be providing services. I felt my knees buckle. "No," I said, my voice cracking. "No, there must be some mistake. This is my wedding." "I'm sorry, ma'am," she cut in, her voice sharp with finality. "The contract is with Mr. Carter. Without his authorization, the event cannot proceed." I hung up before she could say anything else. My hands clenched into fists, my entire body trembling with a fury I had never felt before. My mother grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. What did she say? I turned to her, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. "He canceled everything." The words were barely out of my mouth before my phone rang again. My father's number. Then my maid of honor. Then the DJ. Then the caterer. My stomach twisted as the reality of what was happening crashed down on me. The wedding was falling apart. The guests were standing there, confused, waiting for a reception that wasn't going to happen. The food wasn't coming. The music wasn't playing. There was no honeymoon waiting for me. Ethan had destroyed everything. I called him. Over and over again I called him. And when he finally picked up, when I heard his voice on the other end of the line, I couldn't hold back the rage that had been building inside me. "What the hell did you do?" I screamed. You selfish, pathetic little. He laughed. He actually laughed. A deep, bitter chuckle that sent chills down my spine. You wanted Ryan? You got him, he said coldly. Enjoy your wedding, Jessica. Oh wait, there is no wedding. Not anymore. And then he hung up. I stared at my phone, my hands gripping it so tightly that my knuckles turned white, my entire body shaking with rage. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Ethan was supposed to be weak, spineless, desperate to please. He was supposed to be devastated, not smug. He wasn't supposed to fight back. He wasn't supposed to take everything down with him. My mother was speaking, her voice sharp and panicked, but I barely heard her. My mind was spinning, grasping for a way to fix this. People were watching, whispering, glancing at me, at Ryan, at my parents. I felt their judgment like a weight pressing down on my chest. This was supposed to be a seamless transition, an easy exchange, out with the old, in with the new. No one was supposed to be questioning anything. I turned to Ryan, my voice shaking. Do something. He frowned, crossing his arms, his jaw tight with irritation. Like what? Your loser ex screwed us. What do you want me to do? Magically bring back the reception? I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I wanted him to fix it, to take control, to step up and show everyone why I had chosen him. But he just stood there watching me, waiting. My mother grabbed my arm, dragging me away from the guests, her fingers digging into my skin. We need to call the vendors. Maybe we can salvage this. I nodded, trying to steady my breathing, but as I dialed number after number, the answer was the same. No payment, no service. Ethan had locked everything down. The venue was gone. The catering was canceled. The florist had already packed up. The music was never coming. The cake was sitting untouched in a bakery across town, waiting for someone who wasn't coming to pick it up. Every call was a dead end. Every hope crushed one after another. The whispers around us grew louder, the judgment heavier. I felt the weight of it suffocating me. My stomach churned as the realization hit me. The guests weren't just whispering about Ethan leaving. They were whispering about why. They were starting to put the pieces together. They were realizing that this wasn't some last-minute disaster or some tragic misunderstanding. They were realizing that I had replaced my fiancé on the day of our wedding. I turned, my eyes scanning the crowd, and I saw the way some of them looked at me, friends, family, even my bridesmaids. I saw the disbelief, the quiet condemnation. I saw my father shaking his head, muttering something under his breath. I saw my aunt whispering to her husband, their expressions twisted in disgust. My heart pounded in my chest. They weren't supposed to react like this. They were supposed to understand. They were supposed to see that this was for the best. Ethan was weak. Ryan was strong. This was the right choice. Wasn't it? A sudden awful thought crept into my mind, sinking its claws into me. What if I had miscalculated? What if I had been so sure of Ethan's compliance, of his blind devotion, that I had underestimated him? What if I had spent so long convincing myself that Ryan was better, that he was the real prize, that I had overlooked something crucial? What if I had just thrown away the one man who had truly, deeply, unconditionally loved me? No, I wouldn't think like that. This was what I wanted. This was what I needed. Ethan didn't deserve me. Ethan had always been too passive, too easy to control, too soft. I wanted someone like Ryan, someone dominant, someone powerful, someone who could take charge. I turned to Ryan, clinging to that thought, searching his face for reassurance. But all I saw was annoyance. Frustration. He was irritated that the wedding was ruined, that people were talking, that the spotlight wasn't on him. My stomach twisted, but I shoved it down. I would make this work. I had to. I grabbed his hand, squeezing it. We'll fix this, I said, more to myself than to him. We'll have a private ceremony. Something small, intimate. We don't need all this. Ryan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, sure. Whatever. It wasn't the response I wanted. It wasn't the reassurance I wanted. I ignored the warning bells ringing in my mind. I turned back to my mother, determined to salvage something from this disaster. We need to go after Ethan, she said. He still has control over too much. We need to make him fix this. The thought of begging Ethan for anything made my stomach churn. He was probably sitting somewhere smug, thinking he had one. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. But we had no choice. We had to make him undo what he had done. We had to make him pay for walking away. I dialed his number again, my heart pounding in my chest, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. And then finally he answered. But he didn't speak. I could hear the faint sound of music in the background, the murmur of voices, laughter. He was out, celebrating. My grip on the phone tightened. "Ethan," I hissed. "Fix this." Silence. And then his voice, calm, cool, collected. "No." The line went dead. I stood there, gripping my phone so hard my fingers ached, my breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. He hung up on me. He actually hung up on me. I turned to my mother, my eyes wild with fury, my voice shaking. He said no. The words felt foreign, unnatural, impossible. Ethan had never said no to me before. My mother's face twisted with rage, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my wrist. "We need to find him. Now." Ryan let out an irritated sigh, crossing his arms. "Why? He's not going to change his mind. He's probably sitting somewhere getting drunk, laughing about how he screwed us over." His words sent a fresh wave of humiliation crashing over me. He was right. Ethan was out there celebrating, rubbing this in my face. He was supposed to be devastated. He was supposed to be broken. Instead, I was the one standing in a crumbling wedding venue with hundreds of confused and judgmental guests, scrambling to fix what he had done. My mother turned to Ryan, her expression sharp. "We don't have a choice. Everything is still in his name. If we don't convince him to reinstate the reservations, we're ruined." The word hit me like a slap. Ruined. The thought of people whispering about this for years, of being the woman who got left at the altar, the woman whose wedding imploded in front of everyone. No. I wouldn't let that happen. I refused to let that happen. I spun on my heel, my heart racing, my pulse pounding in my ears. "He's probably at his apartment. Let's go." My mother nodded, grabbing her purse. Ryan groaned but followed. I didn't care if he was annoyed. I needed this fixed. I needed to win. The drive to Ethan's apartment was suffocating. My mind raced with everything I would say to him, how I would demand he fix this, how I would force him to fix this. He wouldn't have the nerve to stand up to me in person. He never did. He was weak. He was soft. I would make him understand that he had no choice. When we pulled up outside his building, I was already halfway out of the car before it fully stopped. My heels clicked furiously against the pavement as I stormed toward his front door. I pounded on it, my jaw clenched, my vision blurred with rage. Silence. My mother knocked next, more controlled but just as demanding. Still nothing. Ryan scoffed behind me. "He's not even here. Waste of time." I refused to believe it. Ethan wasn't like this. He didn't go out. He wasn't spontaneous. He was predictable, boring, always where he was supposed to be. Except tonight he wasn't. I turned, my breath sharp, my mind spinning. If he's not here, where the hell is he? Ryan rolled his eyes, already pulling out his phone. "I'll call around." But before he could dial, my own phone buzzed. A text. My heart leapt as I snatched it up, expecting Ethan, expecting a concession, a surrender. Instead, my blood turned ice. "You're looking for me? No need. I'll see you soon." My fingers clenched around the phone, my stomach twisting. What the hell did that mean? I read it again and again, trying to decipher it, trying to understand what he was planning. The uncertainty made my skin crawl. Ethan never played games. He wasn't this person. He had always been so easy to control. But now I wasn't sure anymore. Now I felt like I had awakened something in him. Ryan frowned at me. "What's wrong?" I hesitated, debating whether to show him the text. But then the sound of tires screeching down the road made my head snap up. A sleek black car pulled up, smooth, controlled, powerful. My heart stopped as Ethan stepped out, dressed in a crisp navy suit, his hair styled with effortless perfection, his expression unreadable. He looked different. Not broken. Not weak. Not the pathetic man I had expected. He looked like he was in control. And when he finally met my eyes, I felt something I had never felt before when looking at Ethan. Fear. Ethan stepped toward us with an unsettling calm, his expression unreadable, his movements controlled, deliberate, confident in a way I had never seen before. My mouth went dry, my pulse hammering as I forced myself to stand my ground, refusing to acknowledge the sudden shift in power between us. He stopped a few feet away, slipping his hands into his pockets like he had all the time in the world, his eyes flicking over me, over my mother, over Ryan before finally settling on me again. "You were looking for me," he said smoothly, his voice calm, composed, mocking. I clenched my fists, stepping forward, ignoring the sinking feeling in my stomach, ignoring the way Ryan suddenly shifted beside me, his frustration turning into something else, something wary. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I spat, my voice rising, the rage clawing at my throat. "You ruined everything." Ethan tilted his head slightly, as if considering my words, then let out a quiet chuckle. A chuckle. I felt my stomach twist. "I ruined everything," he repeated, raising an eyebrow, feigning confusion. "That's funny because from where I'm standing, it looks like I just walked away from a wedding I was no longer invited to. Seems to me like you and Ryan here were planning on replacing me whether I agreed or not. So really, Jessica, how exactly did I ruin everything?" My breath caught, my mind scrambling for a response, my anger boiling over. "You could have just gone quietly," I hissed, my voice lower now, my hands shaking. "You could have let it happen without making a scene, without humiliating me." "You mean like you humiliated me?" he interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp, cutting through the night air like a blade. "Like how I stood there, listening to your mother tell me to either sit in the audience and watch my fiancé marry my brother or get out of my own wedding. You mean like that humiliation, Jessica?" I flinched at his tone, at the way he said my name, slow and deliberate, like he was tasting the weight of it for the first time. My mother stepped forward then, her posture stiff, her voice icy. "Ethan, you need to fix this. You made a spectacle out of nothing, and now our family looks like fools. Call the vendors, reinstate the contracts, and we can move past this." Ethan turned his gaze to her, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face, but there was nothing warm about it. "You still think you're in control, don't you, Diane?" My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, but I saw it then, the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, the same uncertainty tightening in my chest. Ethan had never spoken to her like this before. He had always been polite, always compliant, always willing to bend. But now he looked at her like a predator sizing up weak prey. "You're mistaken about something," he continued, his tone still unnervingly calm, like he was enjoying this. "You think I'm some heartbroken fool who's going to crawl back and make this easy for you. But I'm done making things easy. You wanted Ryan? You got him. You wanted to throw me aside? Fine. But don't expect me to clean up the mess you made." Ryan scoffed beside me, shaking his head. "Jesus, Ethan, stop being so dramatic. You were never right for Jessica, and you damn well knew it. You were just the safe option, the easy choice, but the second she had me, she realized she deserved better. So do yourself a favor and stop embarrassing yourself." Ethan didn't react the way I expected. He didn't get angry, didn't flinch, didn't break. Instead, he smiled, a slow, knowing smirk that sent chills down my spine. "You're right, Ryan," he said simply. "Jessica did deserve better. She deserved a man who wouldn't let her or her controlling mother walk all over him. She deserved a man who could actually see what was happening behind his back." His eyes flicked to me then, his voice lowering. "Tell me, Jessica. Did you ever wonder why I never put your name on anything? Why every contract, every reservation, every payment was in my name?" My breath caught, my mind racing, dread curling in my stomach. No. I hadn't questioned it. I hadn't even thought about it. I had just assumed he was doing what he always did. Taking care of things. Handling the details. Being responsible. Ethan's smirk deepened as he watched the realization sink in. "I knew, Jessica," he said quietly, his voice laced with something dark. "I knew for months." My blood ran cold. "Knew what?" My voice was barely above a whisper. His gaze didn't waver. "That you were screwing my brother." The world tilted. Everything around me seemed to shrink, the air suddenly too thin, the night pressing in too close. My lips parted, my breath hitched, my mother stiffened beside me. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Save it," Ethan cut in, shaking his head, his voice calm but sharp as glass. "I don't need your excuses. I don't need your justifications. I just need you to understand one thing. You lost." The words hit like a slap, knocking the breath from my lungs. He turned then, stepping back toward his car, his posture easy, relaxed, completely unfazed. "And one more thing," he added, glancing at Ryan now, his smirk returning. "Enjoy her while you can. Because if she betrayed me so easily, what makes you think she won't do the same to you?" Ryan bristled beside me, his jaw tightening, but he didn't say anything. Ethan slid into his car without another word, the engine roaring to life. And as he pulled away, leaving me standing there, shaking, humiliated, exposed, I realized for the first time in my life that I had made a terrible mistake. That I stood there, my entire body rigid, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps as Ethan's car disappeared down the street. My mother was the first to speak, her voice sharp, low, controlled, but I could hear the panic buried beneath it. "We need to fix this," she hissed, gripping my wrist so tightly it hurt. "We need to get ahead of this before people start talking." But people were already talking. I could feel it, the weight of the stares, the judgment, the whispers that had started the moment Ethan walked away from that altar. Ryan shifted beside me, exhaling loudly, his arms crossed, his entire posture screaming irritation. "Jesus, Jess, what the hell was that?" "He knew. For months? You told me he was clueless." His tone was accusing, laced with something I couldn't quite place, something that made my stomach twist. I turned to him sharply, my voice coming out harsher than I intended. "You think this is my fault?" Ryan scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "I think you screwed this up worse than I thought possible. I mean, what the hell was the plan here? You thought Ethan would just go along with it? That he'd sit there like a good little boy and let us take everything from him?" My breath hitched, anger flaring in my chest. "You were fine with this plan when you thought it would work," I shot back. "Don't act like you weren't right there with me when we decided to do this." Ryan's eyes narrowed slightly, and I caught it, that flicker of doubt, of hesitation, of something else lurking beneath the surface. He wouldn't say it, not out loud, but I knew what he was thinking. If Ethan had known for months, what else had he done? What else had he planned? My mother was already dialing numbers on her phone, her free hand rubbing her temple. "We need to do damage control. We need to make sure people know Ethan is the one who ruined everything. That he lost his mind and left you, that he—" "That's not going to work," Ryan interrupted, his voice flat, his expression dark. "Not after what just happened. Not after the way he handled that. He didn't look like a man who lost control. He looked like a man who took control." My stomach churned, a deep, uneasy feeling settling into my bones. Ryan was right. Ethan had walked away from all of this with his dignity, his power, his reputation still intact. He had left me standing here, grasping at the ruins of a wedding that never happened, a marriage that never began. And now he was out there, turning the narrative in his favor, making sure everyone saw him as the victim and me as the woman who had tried to humiliate him. The worst part? It was working. My phone buzzed. Then again. And again. The first few messages were from friends, some hesitant, some outright furious. "What the hell happened, Jess? Did you really do this to him? Tell me this isn't true." The ones that followed were worse. Social media notifications. Group chats exploding. Posts, comments, speculation spreading like wildfire. My hands trembled as I opened one of them, my stomach lurching as I saw what was waiting for me. A photo of Ethan at a bar, surrounded by people, a drink in his hand, his smile easy, confident, untouched. The caption below it made my blood run cold. "Dodged a bullet today. Cheers to new beginnings." The comments beneath it were even worse. "Good for you, man. She didn't deserve you. King behavior. He took the trash out himself. This man played the long game and won." My breathing hitched. I felt sick. I could already see it happening, the way people were choosing sides, the way I was losing control of the story, the way Ethan was winning. "We need to shut this down," my mother muttered, still furiously texting, calling, scrambling to fix something that couldn't be fixed. But I wasn't listening anymore. My eyes were on Ryan, on the way his expression had darkened, on the way his jaw was set in frustration. And I realized something then. Something that made the air in my lungs turn sharp and thin. Ryan wasn't looking at me like a man who had won. He was looking at me like a man who had just realized he backed the wrong horse. That I could feel it. The shift in Ryan, the way he wasn't with me anymore, the way he was pulling back, distancing himself from the disaster unfolding around us. My pulse pounded in my ears, my breathing shallow as I watched him, waiting, hoping he would say something, reassure me. Tell me we would fix this together. But he didn't. He just stood there, his jaw clenched, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. My mother was still frantically making calls, her voice sharp, trying to control the situation, trying to control me, but I barely heard her anymore. All I could focus on was Ryan, on the way he wasn't looking at me, on the way his silence felt like a noose tightening around my throat. Ryan, I finally snapped, my voice trembling despite my best effort to keep it steady. Say something. His eyes flicked to me, and for the first time I saw it clearly. Doubt. Regret. Disinterest. The same man who had whispered promises to me, who had told me Ethan was nothing, who had told me I was better off without him, was now looking at me like I was nothing more than a liability. What do you want me to say, Jess? He muttered, exhaling sharply, rubbing the back of his neck. Ethan played us. He saw this coming and he let it happen. He let you think you had the upper hand, and then he flipped the damn script on you. I flinched, his words hitting me harder than I expected. On me. Not us. Me. He was washing his hands of this. He was separating himself from the mess. My stomach twisted. So that's it. I spat, my voice rising, anger bubbling beneath my skin. You're just going to stand there and act like you had nothing to do with this? Like you weren't right there with me, planning everything. Ryan scoffed, shaking his head, his lips curling into a bitter smirk. I didn't plan this, he said, his voice dripping with irritation. I didn't tell you to humiliate the guy at the altar. That was your mother's bright idea, and you went along with it. You wanted Ethan out of the way and you got what you wanted. You just didn't think about what would happen after. My blood ran cold. Are you seriously blaming me for this? Ryan shrugged, his eyes dark, calculating. I'm saying you didn't think ahead. You assumed Ethan would just roll over. And now you're pissed because he didn't. My vision blurred with rage, my hands trembling as I clenched them into fists at my sides. You were supposed to be on my side, I hissed. You were supposed to. To what? Ryan cut in, his voice low, sharp, condescending. Fix everything? Make it all better? Be your perfect replacement for Ethan? Newsflash, Jess, I'm not Ethan. I don't clean up your messes. I don't play the doting, pathetic fiancé who lets you and your mother run my life. The words pathetic fiancé sent a fresh wave of shame crashing over me. He wasn't even hiding it now. He was embarrassed to be here, to be with me. My mother turned sharply, her voice laced with venom. Watch your tone, Ryan, she snapped. You were more than happy to play your part when it benefited you. Don't think for a second you can just walk away from this unscathed. Ryan let out a dry, humorless laugh, shaking his head. Unscathed? He repeated, his eyes flashing. Lady, I'll be just fine. I don't have my name attached to this disaster. No one's blaming me for this train wreck. You too, though. He glanced between us, his smirk cruel, satisfied. You're going to be the punchline of every joke in town for years. My chest tightened, my nails digging into my palms. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to make him feel as trapped and exposed as I did in this moment. But before I could, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. You think I didn't hear the way people were talking at the venue? They weren't pissed at Ethan. They weren't saying poor Jessica, poor girl, her fiancé left her. They were saying she deserved it. They were saying Ryan should run before she does it to him too. My mouth went dry, my stomach plummeting. I had spent so long believing Ethan was the weak one, that I could walk all over him, manipulate him, make him do what I wanted. But I had never realized how people saw me, how they saw us. I had convinced myself that replacing Ethan with Ryan was an upgrade. But now, standing here, watching the way Ryan was looking at me, I realized the awful, gut-wrenching truth. Ryan was already regretting me. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, before Ryan let out another sharp exhale and pulled out his phone. I'm done with this, he muttered, already scrolling through his screen. I need a drink. My breath caught, something inside me cracking, splintering, because I knew. He wasn't coming back from this. I had just lost Ethan. And now I was losing Ryan too. I stood frozen, my mind struggling to keep up with what was happening, with how fast everything was falling apart, with how easily Ryan had just dismissed me like I meant nothing, like I wasn't worth the trouble anymore. He was already walking away, already checking out, already done, and my mother's sharp whisper cut through the air beside me, her nails digging into my wrist. Jessica, don't let him go. My breath hitched, my chest tightening, my pride screaming at me to tell him to screw off, to let him leave, to not give him the satisfaction of watching me beg. But my mother's grip tightened, her voice low, urgent. We are not letting Ethan win. Ryan is the only thing keeping you from looking like a complete failure. If he leaves you now, you'll have lost everything. My stomach twisted violently because I knew she was right. If Ryan walked away now, if he abandoned me after everything, I would be left with nothing. No Ethan. No wedding. No fiancé. Just the shame of what I had done and the judgment of everyone who had witnessed it. I swallowed hard, pushing down the bitter taste of desperation as I forced my feet to move, forcing myself to grab Ryan's arm before he could get too far. Ryan, wait. I breathed, my fingers gripping him tighter than I meant to, my voice softer, pleading, hating how weak I sounded. He sighed, barely sparing me a glance, his irritation clear. What, Jess? I hesitated, trying to find the right words, trying to salvage this, to make him stay, to make him see that I was still the better choice, that I was still worth his time, but the words wouldn't come because for the first time I wasn't sure if any of that was true anymore. My confidence, my control, my certainty that I had made the right decision, that I had chosen the right man, that Ethan was the mistake. It was all unraveling, slipping through my fingers like sand, and I couldn't stop it. I need you. I finally whispered, hating how pathetic it sounded, hating how I actually meant it, hating the way Ryan exhaled sharply like he was tired of me already. Jessica, you don't need me, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. You need someone who's willing to clean up your mess, and that's not me. My heart clenched, the panic rising in my throat. Ryan, please. He finally looked at me, then really looked at me, and what I saw in his expression made my breath catch, made my stomach drop, because I had seen that look before. On my own face. When I looked at Ethan. Disappointment. Resentment. Apathy. The realization nearly knocked the air from my lungs. This was the moment. The exact moment he was done with me. I had always thought Ethan was weak for letting me control him, for letting me dictate our relationship, for bending to my will, for worshipping me. But Ryan wasn't like Ethan. He wasn't the kind of man who let a woman pull the strings. He wasn't the kind of man who stayed when things got messy. And I had just proven to him that I was more trouble than I was worth. He sighed again, prying my fingers off his arm, his expression blank, detached, done. You made your choice, Jess, he muttered. Now live with it. And then he turned, walking away without looking back, without hesitation, without a second thought. I wanted to scream, to chase after him, to make him stay, to tell him he was wrong, that I wasn't a mistake, that I was worth it, that I was everything he ever wanted. But my feet wouldn't move, my voice wouldn't work, and I just stood there, my hands shaking, my breath shallow, my mother stiff beside me, her anger radiating off her in waves. Ryan was gone. Ethan was gone. And I was alone. My mother's voice was ice, her words slow and sharp as she finally spoke. Fix this, Jessica. Now. But I couldn't. Because for the first time in my life I had no idea how did. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the spot where Ryan had just been, my mind refusing to accept that this was happening, that he had actually walked away, that I was standing in the middle of the worst night of my life with no way to fix it, no way to control it, no way to undo the damage I had done. My mother's grip on my wrist tightened, her nails digging into my skin hard enough to hurt, her voice sharp, cold, unforgiving. Jessica, pull yourself together. You are not going to let them see you like this. You are not going to let them think you lost. The words barely registered because the only thing I could think about, the only thing that mattered, was that I had lost. I had lost Ethan. I had lost Ryan. I had lost everything I had spent months planning, controlling, manipulating into place, and now I was standing in the wreckage of my own choices, and there was nothing left. My hands trembled, my breath shallow, my stomach churning with the weight of it all. Mom, what do I do? The words tasted bitter, like defeat, like something I never should have had to say because I was supposed to be the one with the power, the one who had won, the one who had taken everything Ethan had built and handed it over to someone better. But now I had nothing and I had no idea what to do next. My mother's expression hardened, her lips pressing into a thin line. We rebuild, she said simply, as if it were that easy, as if we could just pretend none of this had happened, as if we could somehow spin the narrative in our favor. You go home, you hold your head high, and you do not let anyone see you break. We will figure this out. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that there was still a way to come out of this on top, that we could still turn things around, That I wasn't going to wake up tomorrow and find my name dragged through the mud, my reputation in ruins, my life in pieces. But then my phone buzzed and I knew. I knew. My hands were shaking as I looked down at the screen, my stomach dropping as I saw the message, the name attached to it, the final nail in the coffin of everything I had built. Ethan. Enjoy your new life, Jessica. Hope it was worth it. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around my phone, my heart pounding as I clicked on the attachment he had sent, a link, a video, and the second it started playing, I felt the blood drain from my face, my vision blurring, my breath catching in my throat. It was from the wedding. Someone had recorded it. The entire thing. My mother standing in front of Ethan, her voice clear, sharp, ruthless. You have two options, Ethan, leave quietly, or sit in the audience while my daughter marries a real man. Ethan's silence. The way he looked at me. The way I didn't say a word. The way I just stood there letting it happen. And then the worst part. The moment he walked away. No anger, no begging, no scene. Just quiet, deliberate control. And now it was everywhere. The comments were already piling up, the shares climbing, the sympathy for Ethan growing. And me, my mother, Ryan? We were nothing more than villains in a story that everyone had already decided the ending to. I could already see the headlines, the endless discussion threads, the TikToks analyzing every second of the footage, picking me apart, tearing me apart. My breathing hitched, my fingers trembling as I turned to my mother, my voice barely above a whisper. He ruined me. Her eyes flicked to my phone, her lips pressing together as she exhaled slowly. Her voice measured, controlled, but I could see it in her eyes. The fear. The realization. The understanding that for the first time we had lost. Then we take him down with us, she said simply, already reaching for her phone, already calculating, already preparing for war. But I wasn't sure we could win this one. Because Ethan had played the long game. And Ethan had won. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes I saw the video, saw the moment Ethan walked away. Saw the way he controlled the entire situation without even raising his voice. I saw the comments, the endless flood of strangers calling me every name imaginable, dissecting every second of that footage, tearing me apart, turning me into the villain of a story I thought I had been writing. I wasn't in control anymore. I wasn't the one setting the narrative. Ethan was. And he was winning. My mother had spent the entire night on the phone, making calls, trying to reach people, trying to spin this, but it wasn't working. The story had already taken root. Ethan was the wronged fiancé. The man who had been humiliated at the altar, the man who had quietly walked away while his selfish, unfaithful fiancé replaced him with his own brother. He didn't even have to say anything. The world was speaking for him. By morning I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to do something, needed to find a way to fix this, needed to see him, talk to him, make him undo this. My mother didn't argue when I told her I was going to see Ethan. She just gave me a look, a knowing one, a cold one, the kind that said, you fix this or you'll regret it. I drove to his apartment, my fingers gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The whole way there I practiced what I was going to say, the way I was going to convince him that this had gone too far, that he had made his point, that he needed to stop this before it got worse, before things got too ugly. But deep down I knew. This was already ugly. I pulled into the parking lot and barely had time to steady my breathing before I saw him. Ethan. Walking out of his building. Looking different. Looking better. He was wearing a sharp black jacket, his hair styled in a way that looked effortless but wasn't. His entire presence screaming something I had never associated with him before. Power. Confidence. Control. He didn't look like the heartbroken man I had expected. He didn't look like someone who had just lost the love of his life. He looked like a man who had one. And the worst part? He wasn't alone. A woman stepped out behind him, laughing at something he said, her long dark hair falling over her shoulders, her dress hugging her body in all the right places, her hand brushing against his arm in a way that felt too easy, too comfortable, too familiar. My stomach twisted violently. My pulse spiked. Who the hell was she? Ethan glanced up then, locking eyes with me, his expression unreadable, his lips twitching slightly, as if he wasn't surprised to see me, as if he had been expecting this, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. He leaned toward the woman, saying something low in her ear, making her laugh before she touched his arm again and walked off toward a waiting car. And then he turned to me, slipping his hands into his pockets, tilting his head slightly, waiting, making me come to him. I swallowed hard, forcing my legs to move, forcing myself to push down the sudden, overwhelming jealousy clawing at my chest, forcing myself to remember why I was here. To fix this. To stop this. To make him undo what he had done. "We need to talk," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. My emotions getting the better of me. My mind still racing with the image of that woman touching him, laughing with him, being with him. Ethan raised an eyebrow, glancing at his watch. "You've got 5 minutes." The dismissal hit me harder than I expected, but I didn't let it show. "You need to stop this," I snapped, stepping closer, my hands trembling at my sides. "This has gone too far. The video, the comments, the way people are talking. Ethan, you're ruining me." His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Am I?" My breath caught, my stomach twisting again because he wasn't denying it. He wasn't playing dumb. He knew exactly what he was doing, and worse, he was enjoying it. "You got what you wanted," I hissed, my voice dropping lower, my anger bubbling over. "You walked away. You humiliated me. Isn't that enough?" Ethan exhaled slowly, shaking his head slightly. "See, Jessica, that's the thing. I didn't humiliate you. You did that to yourself." My mouth opened, but no words came out. He took a step closer, lowering his voice, his eyes locking onto mine with a sharpness that sent a shiver down my spine. "You and your mother tried to break me," he murmured. "You thought I'd roll over, thought I'd take it, thought I'd be weak. But you forgot something, Jess." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I was never weak. I just loved you too much to show you what I was capable of." My entire body went still, my heart hammering, my mind reeling. This wasn't the Ethan I had known. This wasn't the man I had spent years controlling, molding, shaping into exactly what I wanted him to be. This was someone else entirely. And for the first time since this all started, I realized something that made my blood turn ice. I had never feared Ethan before. But I did now that I couldn't breathe. Ethan stood there, watching me, waiting, his expression unreadable, his words still sinking into my skin like poison. "I was never weak. I just loved you too much to show you what I was capable of." My chest tightened, my stomach twisted, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something I had never felt toward Ethan before. Fear. He wasn't supposed to be like this. He was supposed to be heartbroken, devastated, desperate to take me back, desperate to undo the damage, to beg for another chance, to prove to me that he still loved me. But that wasn't what was happening. He was enjoying this. He was thriving in it. And that woman, the one who had been laughing with him, touching his arm so easily, so confidently, was proof of that. My hands clenched at my sides, my pulse hammering in my ears, my pride screaming at me to pull myself together, to stop looking like a weak, desperate fool in front of the very man I had tossed aside. "You can't just destroy me," I forced out, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. "You can't just stand there and act like you didn't love me, like we didn't build something, like I didn't." "Didn't what?" Ethan cut in smoothly, tilting his head slightly, his voice sharp, mocking. "Didn't humiliate me? Didn't replace me? Didn't throw me away for someone who couldn't even be bothered to stick around after he got what he wanted?" My breath hitched, my face burning, my entire body recoiling at the way he said it, the way he made it sound so simple. Like I was nothing. Like Ryan had never cared at all. He chuckled then, the sound low, bitter. "You thought you had it all figured out, didn't you?" His eyes flicked over me, assessing, calculating. "Thought you'd trade up, thought I'd crumble, thought I'd be too pathetic to do anything but disappear quietly while you and Ryan played house." My throat felt tight, my anger rising fast, hot, desperate. "You think this makes you the better person?" I snapped. "You think ruining my life makes you some kind of hero?" His smirk deepened, his gaze steady, unaffected, cold. "No," he said simply. "I just think it makes us even." My stomach dropped. Even. That's what this was. That's what he wanted. Not revenge. Not love. Just balance. He wanted me to feel what he had felt. He wanted me to understand, to experience every single ounce of the humiliation, the betrayal, the destruction that I had so easily thrown at him. And I did. I felt every second of it. Every piece of my carefully curated life slipping through my fingers. Every ounce of control I had once had crumbling beneath me. I thought I had been the one pulling the strings. I thought I had been the one calling the shots. But I had been wrong. So wrong. Ethan exhaled slowly, slipping his hands back into his pockets, tilting his head slightly. "You should go, Jess," he said, his voice calm, measured, dismissive. "You lost. There's nothing left for you here." The words hit like a slap, stealing the air from my lungs. My vision blurred, my heart pounded, and I opened my mouth to say something, anything to salvage this, to fix this, to convince him that he still wanted me, that I was still worth something, but he was already turning away. Walking away. Just like I had made him do. And this time there was no undoing it. No second chance. No coming back. I had spent so long believing Ethan was weak, but the truth was he had never been weak at all. He had just loved me enough to let me think he was. But that love was gone now. And so was he. And for the first time in my life I realized what it meant to truly lose.